Awesome. So my session, don't have any slides. My session is going to be about a couple of things: PowerShell, PowerShell desired state configuration, Pester, Git, TeamCity. Yeah. Yeah. TeamCity, and there's a slider down bottom right here. And NuGet. So I'm not going to go into detail on any of those topics. This is basically just showing off what you can do and what you should do, in my opinion. So PowerShell, everybody knows PowerShell. Everybody uses PowerShell on a day-to-day basis. Yeah, people nodding. Great. If you're not, go do it. PowerShell has been around for 8 years now, 2007, 8 years. It's come a long way. Pester, which is unit testing for PowerShell, basically, it's also been around for 6 of those 8 years. Nobody really heard of Pester before. I think Jeffrey Snowver used it or mentioned it at one of the last Ignite sessions. Pester is basically describing, is anybody in here who uses RSpec on Unix? Unix, yeah. Pester is basically that. So you describe test cases for your PowerShell scripts. Let's say that's our PowerShell function. So Pester basically forces you to write functions, to write modules. Yeah, we're not writing lines of codes anymore. We're not writing scripts, we're writing functions, we're writing modules. And Pester will help you test those functions and modules. This is our very complex test function, which will create a file. And if I wanted to test that file, is it large enough? Yeah. What I can do is describe a test with the describe keyword, and then just say, this test, it creates a file, tell it to create that file, use that function, and then the result of that function should be false. Because I know that on none of my systems, there's an E partition. Yeah, I basically force it to fail. I try to catch myself with my functions. Next, what Pester also gives you is that test drive. So Pester helps you test your functions or test your tests on ghost partitions, basically. So that will always be true. So create that file on test drive, that test file, and it should be true. So if I now go...
So your function has to return true and false, or some sort of...
Yeah, so going back to that function, parameter statement, try, do that, catch. If it doesn't, return true or false, depending on the outcome.
Can you input parameters in there?
In where? In Pester? Yeah, sure. Ah, wrong. So I'm specifying
you're not passing any parameters. I'm talking about
you need to actually test.
Right, okay.
Oh, we'll do that later. Right. So all I have to do is it here? Call invoke Pester, and it will, for whatever reason, fail. Awesome. So basically what it does is it runs those tests and specifies and tells you, I've successfully run first test and the second test both passed. Don't know what that right error, why it does this. No idea. But I can now go and investigate that error going on. If there are any questions, not as usual, don't shout, do it later. PowerShell desired state configuration. Who has used PowerShell desired state configuration before? Yeah? Okay. So a lot of people haven't. Desired state configuration, again, Unix, Chef, Puppet. We're going to see James showing us Chef in a moment. A declarative way of specifying the system's state in PowerShell. DSC, desired state configuration, is a DSL, a domain-specific language for PowerShell, which basically abstracts what's actually happening in the background from you, so you can go and write, where is it? Something like this. Actually, that's not true. Something like this to install a config manager, where you only have to specify when insert a Windows feature, ensure that it's present on that machine and which name. And what I have done, and I'm always going back to that example, is down here. I have developed and it's going, are there any developers in here? Great. It's going towards development. Every developer would laugh at this point in time. I've developed my own resource for DSC, which is the C Config Manager 2012 module with a CM primary site resource. So with just that, I can install Config Manager. Basically, all my Config Manager installations are based on DSC nowadays. Now I want to test that. And what I'm doing with that is, usually what I try to do is, first I'm trying to find out, is my DSC resource capable of creating a MOV file? That's what DSC uses, or desired state configuration uses in the back, a MOV file. Because nobody likes writing MOV files, Microsoft created or developed DSC for you, so you don't have to go and write MOV files. So one of the tests is, can it actually create a MOV file? Because if it can't, then there's something wrong in my resource. If it can, then there's a good chance that it should work. So that's the first test. The DSC test, I'm calling the resource, and it should create a MOV file in test drive dsc.localhost.mov, and it should exist. By the way, Pester is very well documented on GitHub, and there's a very good wiki on that. So, because it's all community-based, there is actually good documentation about it. The next test would be to see if those functions, because every resource is made up of 3 functions, a get target resource, a test target resource, and a set target resource. I'm not so much worried about the set target resource, but the test and get target resource. There's reasons why I'm not so much worried about the set, at least right now, but I need to now test if those 2 functions are working as expected. So what I'm testing, first test target resource, I call that and the result of that should not be null or empty. The next one, the get target resource, always returns a hash table with some values. In my case, I'm expecting a hash table called something with a property called site code with a value of PRI, which is my site code. Because I'm not actually going to run that on a live environment, if I'm going to run that on anybody's machine, it will always be false. Because that call, that get sim instance call, will always be false unless there's really low chance somebody here is actually running a config manager instance on that machine with that site code. Then it will be true. So I have to mock that call. So Pester enables you to mock a call. So whenever Pester is going to run that test, instead of calling get sim instance, and I can show you that in that get target resource, instead of running that on line 57, it will go and call line 64 in here. It's not actually calling anything, I'm just presenting it with a custom object, a PS object, with the thing that I'm expecting in a real life environment. With that in mind, I'm telling it that get target resource should, the result of that should match PRI. Could also test if that result, the return value of it, is a hash table. Would also be sort of true or sort of valid, that test, but not as close as the actual return. With all that, proper scripting nowadays should, with all that DevOps thing going on at the moment, should use more and more tools that developers have been using for much longer than I'm in IT. So more than 6 years. What I'm trying to get at is source control. Who in here thinks that a folder on a separate partition or external disk drive is rhetorical? It's source control. Yeah. Or DSC tests.ps1, DSC tests final.ps1, really final, working, really working. That used to be my source control. Git, for example, or TFS, Visual Studio Online, whatever, they're all source control mechanisms. I usually use Git because there's good tools for PowerShell as well. And Git is free, doesn't cost anything, and if you want to use private repositories, you could, for example, use a hosted service like GitLab. Very common in the community is GitHub. It's also completely free, completely open source. There's tools for Windows, but if you want private repositories, you have to pay $7.
Starting from $7.
Yeah, $7 for five repos, right?
Per month.
Yeah. So we're going to be broke after that. It's actual source control. I'm not going to go much deeper into that. What I want to show is how all that comes together. Mainly CI, continuous integration. I'm not going to talk about CD, which would be continuous deployment. But what that means is I've got my source control. I'm going to fork off of that or create a new branch where I fix something or I develop a new feature, test that, write my tests, write my unit tests, and then I commit all those changes back into source control, and then I want something to happen. I want that CI tool to actually run those tests, do something with my check in my latest commit. You could use Azure Automation, for example, now with those webhooks in Azure Automation that can react to whatever happens on GitHub, for example, or GitLab or wherever. What it does here, so I've got a new commit, and that project is hooked into my version control. So I've hooked my TeamCity server, which is running on my home server. It's hooked into GitLab, my GitLab repository. And as soon as I commit something new code into my repository, it will run that build. And you can basically configure whatever you want in here. It'll do it. Don't know, James, are you going to mention stuff like Vagrant, Kitchen? Okay, yeah, later. What I'm doing is first make sure Pester is installed on the build agent. Otherwise, there won't be any tests. I'm using ps-get for that. So go in here, run type, it's PowerShell. And what I'm doing here, just check if that module is there. And if it's not there, find module Pester, goes out to NuGet repo, and installs that module. Actually, ps-get. Go back. Next, I copy the whole build, the whole latest commit, locally to C10. Copy that DSC resource to my PS module path under C program files Windows PowerShell modules, so that PowerShell is aware of that new resource. And then I run my Pester tests, basically just invoke Pester. And next thing, that's where the fifth topic comes in. I compress that resource to a zip file with PowerShell version 5, WMF5, compress archive, new commandlet, and pack it into a NuGet package. NuGet is a whole topic for itself, but what it basically would enable me, it's again just a container, a package. Can take that package to wherever I want and then install it. Who's heard of Chocolatey? Awesome thing. If you don't use it, have a look at it. It's again a package provider, also based on NuGet. You can specify install scripts, pre-install, post-install scripts, and have that NuGet package execute whatever you want. And also, for example, in this case, I could use a CD tool like Octopus Deploy, for example, and have Octopus Deploy take that NuGet package and unzip it on my DSC pull server or on a Chef server, and then make it available to all my clients through that. Last step is the cleanup. Not going to have much time left. I'm already spot on right now, but just going to show you the results. Because the nice thing is, Pester uses a standard industry output, NUnit. So in here, can go into my latest build, have a look on tests, and it'll actually tell me that all my tests ran successfully via Pester. If I have a look at one of the tests that failed, it'll tell me which failed and why. It will also tell me in here, test 47 or build 47, how many of those failed tests or failures were actually new to that specific build. So if somebody's committed new code and out of a sudden that number goes up, then something's wrong in that code, obviously. So very last thing, I can also publish any artifacts out of that build to my CI server. Check that in here and have a look at that content. So that latest build created a NuGet package for me, so NUPKG package. Under content, there's my resource zip, and there's my config manager resource. If I go and copy that or extract that zip file to any Windows server to a certain path, it will automatically pick up that custom resource, and I can use it from then on. That's it. Only 2 minutes over. And 5 topics. Thanks very much. If there's any questions at all, later, now,
so
no idea.
Is something that you have to install.